What's going on, everyone? We're here with a little special Aggie Sports Roundtable. We got Robert Cessna here and Alex Miller. I'm Travis Brown of the Eagle. It's the 10-year anniversary of the A&M Women's Basketball National Championship, and we're here to recap that and reminisce about that a little bit. Cease, I know you were the guy on the beat. What sticks out to you the most about that season? Or what is the first thing that pops in your mind when you think about that season now 10 years apart?
Well, I think you guys can relate to it. I mean, say what you will, just the fact they won a national championship. We take that for granted. I think sometimes about people winning national championships, and I thought about this since we said this yesterday, and I think it's because Alabama wins so many football championships, and now that A&M's in the SEC, I think people kind of just expect, national championships. But you stop and think about how many times like A&M baseball has gone to College World Series and not won. You think in basketball, how close they came in Gillespie. I always think of the Memphis game in San Antonio, and now that's like a decade and a half ago. And to think that team won the national championship. And when I started covering the beat, they were the worst team in the Big 12. And then you think about they won a national championship. And we're seeing once again, is this year how hard it is just to get to the Final Four, let alone win a national championship. And I don't want to belittle other sports. Every sport's different. But sometimes, for example, there's a lot of questions won how many national championships, because I like 20 some teams. I mean, it's just so hard to win a national championship. And 10 years later, let's be honest, at my age now, I can feel how some of those old guys deal that when the 39 team, and they died out. They never even got back and won another national championship. Just the fact that sometimes you got to hit yourself on the head. Like, I could have had a V8. They won the national championship.
Yeah. Alex, I know you were just but a wee lad around that time, but you did have a little bit of time following that team in that season. What do you remember about that season?
Yeah, I was in middle school at the time, and my grandparents have been longtime A&M women's basketball season ticket holders. So I actually went to a lot of A&M women's games growing up. And of course, when they were in the Ncaa Tournament, we followed them. I went to the Elite Eight game in Dallas when they beat Baylor. We actually went to the national championship game in Indianapolis. I just remember it being really special, kind of like what Cease said. I mean, that's the only national championship A&M's won in a major sport since the football team won in 1939. I mean, that shows how monumental that was for A&M to win that. And I just remember it being a really special season. You think about women's basketball, and you think about who A&M went through to win the national championship. They beat Baylor on that fourth time. They beat Stanford, and then they beat Notre Dame, who had just beat UConn. I mean, A&M really had to beat some really good teams to get there. And, like what C said too, when Gary got there, going from last place to then 8 years later, they win the national championship. That's a huge step forward when you think about kind of the disparity that can happen sometimes in women's basketball. You've got a lot of really good blue bloods. And then for a team like A&M to break through and win the national championship, I mean, that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, Alex brought up a good point, Cease. You play Baylor 4 times in a season and lose the first 3 before winning the last one, the one that matters. When you were watching A&M take on Baylor time after time and lose time after time, I mean, not that you would ever have thought that this A&M team would be the team that necessarily goes all the way, but did that kind of further cement in your mind as it was happening that this might be a Sweet 16 or an Elite Eight team, or and that might be where they fizzle out?
I thought as the season unfolds, this could be a team to go to the Final Four and have a magical run or Cinderella run, because how they matched up to Baylor. Remember with Baylor, with Brittany Griner, that was one of the teams that everybody looked at as going to the Final Four. And as the season evolved, each time A&M played them, they played them better. And as you sat there, I remember those games, all Baylor so close, so close, at home, and then play them so well, up in Kansas City. And you're saying like, okay. And I felt like playing Baylor in retrospect, you always love looking back, you hope what you learned as a writer, a coach, player, whatever. But I think playing Baylor helped A&M stay focused. They weren't worried about Tennessee or Connecticut or Stanford. They knew they had to worry about, they had one of the best teams, if not the best team in the country in their own conference. They just had to focus a little bit like, once again, Alabama football. You just had to focus on Baylor. And if you're closing the gap on Baylor, you're getting better. A&M knew they were getting better every time they played Baylor. Baylor knew they were getting better every time. And that's why Mulkey raised all kind of Dickens as well. She should have. They never should have been placed in the same region. But what really happened is, once again, it galvanized A&M. A&M was focused. Like, if they got to Dallas, they knew they were going to play Baylor. And Baylor fans already at the lower side, they're sold out because they knew they were going to be there playing to go to the Final Four. A&M was hoping they would be there. But getting back to is, I think the fact that they every time they played Baylor, I felt they got more confident.
When let's just backtrack even a little bit further. You talk about A&M being one of the worst teams in the Big 12 and to come and make that turnaround. How much of that is simply what Gary Blair injected into this program?
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. You go back when, you could say, well, he should have been here a long time ago. You got to give Bill Byrne a lot of credit for hiring a Texan, a Gary Blair, a guy that knew what he was walking into, figured, and I'll never forget it. First time I talked to Gary, he's just like he is right now. And you're thinking like, dang, I need to get this guy to come down here. He's going to make my job easier. I mean, he just telling jokes left and right, never met me, go off the record and go like, dang, all right. And then you come in and, I've always said, I never thought he'd win a national championship because I knew how bad A&M was. I mean, it was really bad. I can remember when they played. And I covered some of the games, even though I wasn't full-time, because no one wanted to cover A&M women's basketball. I mean, a lot of times it's like, hey, there's a great track meet, Cessna. Why don't you go cover the women's basketball game? And I'm the boss. And you know how that goes. You guys know. And I remember covering Baylor against A&M here, and it was the last game of Peggy Gillum. And I took my kids, two of my kids, I set up in the stands, and there was more Baylor fans than there were A&M fans at a home game. And I went down and Jerry Hill goes, oh, I didn't know, where were you? I was up with my kids. And, it's just like, it was like gone to a funeral that no one liked the guy. I mean, you showed up and you go like, where is everybody? And you go, did the guy not make this much of an impact? But yeah, Gary Blair, he could recruit what he's been able to do and continue to do. I would equate a lot to Bill Snyder, what he did at Kansas City. Now, football's a different sport, and Bill Snyder just missed winning a national championship where they'd have all kind of statues throughout all Kansas. But what Gary Blair did, and once again, what Alex touched, talking about a major sport, women's basketball cares more and more each year. We're seeing each year more and more people put money into the program because people care.
Yeah, exactly. So let's touch a little bit on the players. You have, of course, Danielle Adams, Sydney Carter, Sydney Coulson, some of these names that always come back through A&M and A&M fans when they're talking about women's basketball. So who are some of those players well, actually, let's start out with Alex, because who are some of those players as a middle school kid you kind of looked up to and saw and remembered from following that season?
Yeah, how many got autographs? Let's see how many got autographs.
You're gonna pull up your little hat with the autographs on it, with the beanie on with the propeller on top.
All right. No, I think the one that stands out to me is Sydney Coulson. I mean, she was kind of the ringleader, it seemed like, of that team. She had been there 4 years, senior, finally won it. She was the vocal leader, the point guard. Daniel Adams was the star. Tyra White made all the big plays, but Sydney Coulson was the one that was the glue of the team. And that she was the one that really stood out to me on that team.
Cease.
Without a doubt, Sydney Coulson. A lot of girls on that team. I call them girls because they were my favorites. But nobody like Coulson. Even to this day, when I talk to her, she just had the personality that could light up a room. And as a rider, you go, "Oh my gosh, she's going to say something I'm going to be able to use or whatever," because she was so good. And then you look at all the complementary players. I always call like Tyra White the silent assassin, how she could shoot, whatever. What I liked about Danielle Adams, this is a girl that came here overweight, but just so talented. She talked about her weight. Back then, I even one time asked her how in a press conference, "Do you mind telling us how much you lost weight or whatever?" And she did. Today, I'd probably lose my job, but just shows you how good she was for the team and how the work she went through to become the player she was. You got to tip your hat to her. What about Adora Alanu? Did all the heavy work underneath. People forget about her. Carla Gilbert coming off the bench, Kelsey Asarian, Marianne Baker. That team had a lot of leaders. And you could see in retrospect how they won and were jumping all around. But, and I did some anniversary work back when they had all the deals, when they had their quote anniversary time here about a month ago in the season, because they wanted to do it during the season. And they all brought up a good point, even the coaches. When they lost in the previous year to Gonzaga up in Seattle, I'll never forget, because as a rider, man, I was in Seattle for 4 or 5 days. That was awesome. I'd already said, in the Sweet 16 or wherever I was going to go, more good food, more Marriott points at the Eagle, maybe a casino nearby. And they lost to Gonzaga. They were the better team, except for Courtney Van Schluter or whatever her name was. She was an awesome player. Went on to the WNBA, was really good. And A&M couldn't stop her. And I'll never forget the shot that it was a tough shot, but Adams had a baseline shot. If she makes it, they win, and she didn't make it. And that team was pretty much devastated. I didn't realize how devastated at the time, but sometimes, it's what happens the previous year that puts a burr in you. And all the players talked about that summer, they remembered that loss. And once again, I think that helped them in the Baylor losses, because they weren't going to be denied that year. And we always hear that, it's like, we hope the A&M baseball team. I'll never forget when we lost those 3 games in Florida, when home lost to worthless Rice. And then that took us all the way. We went to the College World Series in 2021. You always hope that, but until you see it, and that team walked the walk, so to speak. When they had that tough loss, they were better that year. They should have gone further, and they made up for it the following year. But all those players, they all have a place in history, because they got the ring, baby. And, 10 years later, I'm saying, like, back then I was young.
Yeah. Just recapping and going through, of course, Daniel Adams was the team leader in points, averaged 22.3 a game, followed by Tyra White with 13.8, Sydney Carter 10.4, Sydney Coulson 8. Just a lot of good offensive players on that squad. Let's go into the NCAA tournament. The actual run through the tournament. Definitely up until they got to that Baylor game, it was pretty smooth sailing, wasn't it?
Here's the deal is, you talk about, warning signs and all this. You think about how this year's team that we all thought had a great chance to go to the Final Four struggled in their first games. A&M was blowing out. I'll never forget, Georgia was supposed to be pretty good, and that's the team they played before they played Baylor up in regionals, and A&M just destroyed Georgia.
79-38.
Andy Landers, the hair dye was dripping out of his head by the time he got in the interview room. That A&M had just, that was just a total dismantle. And that comes off my mind. Rutgers, I got my list here too. They just destroyed Rutgers in the second round. Just such a good team that just took care of business. And once again, they even lost during conference play to Kansas State. The Big 12 was pretty good back then. Had more than one or two good teams, and it also prepared A&M well for the postseason because. Once again, as you could say, like, oh, they're probably going to play Baylor. Oh, man, they might have to play Rutgers. They might have to play Georgia. They destroyed those teams.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You get into the last three games of the tournament. Of course, we've talked a little bit about that Baylor win in Dallas, number 3 Baylor at the time. Then you go on to have to play number 2 Stanford in the national semifinal in a game that they eked out by 1 point. What do Alex or Cease? I'll let either of you jump in. What do you remember about that game?
Alex, you just went to the national championship game. Did you go to the semifinal game too?
I only went to the national championship game, but I definitely remember watching the semifinal game. Stanford was a 1 seed. All 3 were a 1 seed. Is that right?
No, Notre Dame was
2. Notre Dame was a 2.
Tennessee. Yeah.
That's right. Notre Dame was a 2. But yeah, I mean, how can you forget Tyra White's shot to beat Stanford at the last second? You think about the pass that Sydney Coulson had to make between the 2 defenders and then to get the shot up. I mean, it was literally as perfect as you could get, and it had to be that way or else she doesn't make the shot. And so and you think about beating a team like Stanford, and that's when they had Ncaa, and she was terrific for them. And they have their legendary coach, Tara Vanderveer. Is that right?
Yeah, Tara Vanderveer.
Yeah. And I remember watching that game, and afterward, my grandma called me and was like, all right, we're going to Indianapolis on Monday. I'll write you a note for school.
Well, it's funny. You remember a lot of things. The Eagle, we went big time because it was big. It was big back then. Stuart Villanova, photographer. We went up there too. And people cared. People jumped on that bandwagon hard. Let me tell you what. We went to the practices up there in Indianapolis and shot pictures and did stories. And I always remember, women's basketball is a big deal in the Big 12, you think, and all that. And, of course, that was my first time go to the Final Four, and it's a big deal, obviously. You got Stanford there. You got UConn there. You got Notre Dame. And I remember going into the workroom for the first time, this huge workroom. And Shelly Smith, you see all these big-time national people because, UConn was on the way up, was established, and all that. All that was – and I was trying to find a place to sit down. I always remember is like they kept making me. Make a long story short, I was going to a table in the back. It was like you could tell these people like I'm here to cover A&M, and it was like, oh yeah, okay, you'll be gone in one day, so you don't need to be sitting here with us, And of course, you kind of guys know I'm a little bit funny, whatever, and they could say like, "Oh, that guy's funny" and all that, but him and that old guy from A&M coach are going to be gone here in 24 hours, and so we'll have some more room. And I was just kind of laughing to myself, thinking, I kind of hope A&M wins because you could feel like everybody was already getting pumped up about that to cover that UConn Stanford game, and they were talking about who should win that game. And I'm there like, shouldn't they play the semifinals first before all you know-it-alls? And so needless to say, as writers, we're all, you don't want to be Homer, but you do want your home team that you cover to win. It was one of those times I really wanted A&M to win so that those other people would know they play basketball outside Stanford and outside UConn.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely remember the setup in Indianapolis being cool because it was all in downtown. They played at the Pacers Arena, and they have the convention center across the street with all the activities, and everything's just walkable. Really cool from a fan experience at the time. Really cool to be there in that moment, and I've been to a lot of big games, I feel like, and, gotten to go to some big football venues. I covered the Women's College World Series in OKC, but being at the national championship game, there's just something different about being at that game in particular. It's the only time I've ever been to a national championship game, and it's special. It really is.
And I don't know if you went to, Alex, now that you talking, you jogged my memory. It's just we end up doing like a 4-section tribute to A&M after we came back. So we went to as much stuff as we went. We went to like the send-off party at their hotel before they left, like 2 hours before the game. And I forget what hotel the team was staying in, but it was a 2-deck in the lobby, whatever. You could look down and there was Aggie fans everywhere, and they were selling alcohol, by the way. There, I do remember that. And I was a lot of people were, and there was a lot of maroon, and to see the team leaving, and like you said, it was close, but to have all that support as they left to go play the national championship game, and I'm thinking, hey, this is neat. This is something you expect from football. Or
when you think about it, it was in Notre Dame's backyard too. I mean, South Bend's just a short little drive down to Indianapolis. We actually stayed. I think we stayed at the JW Marriott, the big one, and that was where Notre Dame was staying. Because I remember after the game, we had gotten like some hats or something that they sold in the arena, and we get on the elevator, and a Notre Dame player and her dad are on the elevator with us, and she's just cried her eyes out. And we're holding all this stuff, and my grandma goes, "You played a great game. You should be proud of yourself," or something like that. It was really awkward and funny.
Oh, there's a lot of moments you remember. I remember this is I had to do like 3 stories, and luckily A&M played first. But needless to say, I blew all kind of deadlines and primo waiting or whatever. But I'll never forget. As soon as the game was over, I had to run out and talk to President Lofton and Byrne were there at midcourt as all the confetti came down that was the color of it was blue and gold Notre Dame, because everybody thought they were going to win. So I'm there interviewing them as all that confetti falls over us. I always remember that. And Lofton's there like trying to get that stuff off his bow tie because, it's the wrong color. And I'm just laughing to myself as I ask questions. But needless to say, Lofton and Byrne were rightfully pretty happy at that moment. Didn't mind having the wrong color confetti.
Right.
Yeah, you beat me to the punch. I was going to mention the confetti because I definitely remember it being the Notre Dame colors. Just it was funny how that all ended up.
And I wasn't near Gary, but I would imagine Gary probably said, "Well, I'll be damned."
Well, we've danced around the before and after of the actual national championship game. Let's get into it. What do you remember about the play on the court from that game, Cease?
Oh, just great plays. Of course, Notre Dame had Skylar Diggins, and I mean she was awesome. She was an All-American. First really interaction with Muffet McGraw. Great coach, great interview. Love being around her. So good for the game, a la Gary, a female Gary. Of course, A&M would play them 2 or 3 more times or whatever. So I got to ask her a lot of questions, really respect her as a coach and a person, whatever. And it's just a great game. And I always Danielle Adams came up big when they need her most. You remember different things, but also remember you're in the Big 12. So I'm sitting in midcourt, and I got Wendell Barnhouse beside me. Mm-hmm. And, Wendell's covering the Big 12, and I'm there just like, hey, that was the national championship game. And I can remember early, Notre Dame was playing really well. And all of a sudden, Wendell looks to me and goes, "I'll tell you what, Daniel Adams needs to start playing better. I'll tell you what, I just don't lose if she don't start playing better." I'm thinking like, holy crap, we're just covering the game, Wendell. Let's just ease up, but great game, great intensity. You're thinking a national championship. And, I'll always remember, to be quite honest with you, I have to go back and look up. I just remember how intense it was, how well A&M played down the stretch, particularly Daniel Adams. That's all I remember, that A&M was by far the better team. Diggins played a great game, but with Carter and Coulson and that group, A&M was just the better team.
Yeah, I think the two previous games they had really prepared them for that one, because if you remember, A&M was winning that first half, but then Notre Dame comes back and goes on a run to take the lead into halftime. But then A&M obviously comes back in the second with a good response. But, a team like Notre Dame that had been there before, you could think that, oh, they're about to pull away. They got Diggins. They've got a great supporting cast. But, yeah, Daniel Adams was terrific. And, I mean, the three-pointer by Tyra White, I mean, that's going to be in every highlight video for A&M women's basketball for forever.
Of course,
Yeah.
Daniel Adams, 30 points, Tyra White, 18 points, 9 rebounds added on for Daniel Adams, and 5 for White, kind of led the way. And then the other double-digit scorer was Sydney Coulson with 10 points. And then for Notre Dame, like you mentioned, Skylar Diggins, 23 points. And then Devereaux Peters, 21 points and 11 rebounds for Notre Dame was kind of their big push. Like Alex, you did say, Notre Dame was up 35-33 at halftime. A&M outscored them 43-35 in the second half.
You got to remember Notre Dame also by beating Connecticut. They got some huge props. It was like A&M beating Baylor. A lot of the national people did think that Notre Dame would win. And once again, I don't think they disrespected A&M. It's just that they didn't really know how good A&M was. Yeah, they saw the Stanford game, but if you just saw that one game, you think, oh, well, maybe that was their best effort. Maybe that's a fluke, and it's easy to do that until you arrive. People are always going to doubt you, and so I think actually the way it couldn't have worked better for A&M, because A&M really wasn't a Cinderella. A&M was the best team, and they proved it. In that the way they took those last 4 or 5 games, and no prisoners against the bad teams, get over the hump against Baylor, and then you go beat Stanford, who was really good, and Notre Dame, which was really good, and also coming off a huge win, considering they had just beat Tennessee and Connecticut back-to-back. Both had beaten back-to-back number 1 seeds. So it was a great game. And once again, is every 10 years, well, I'll hopefully make another 10 years, you always remember that's the team that set the bar. And when you set the bar, I don't care what program you're in or whatever, you're out to set a bar. And, the A&M men's basketball team is still trying to set a bar. You think about baseball teams still trying to set a bar. You think about how tough it is in softball, because the bar's been set 3 times they won a national championship. When you won a national championship, man, that's so good to relive, but the bar's high. The bar's high. And all those girls can take a lot of, feel a lot of, they're always going to be remembered. They won a national championship.
Let's close out with this, and you kind of touched on it a little bit there. What has been the lasting effects of that national championship run, not only to the A&M women's program, but to the university? I mean, I think from coming in and covering this beat a little bit later, that is somewhat of kind of the bar that the entire athletic program is set to as well. Like you were saying, the whole department, because there is a program that's won a national championship, and the expectation now is that other programs can win national championships, because if one, especially women's basketball, can win a national championship, men's basketball, baseball, softball, all of these other programs should be able to do it as well. And you can give a little hat tip to Pat Henry and the track team of what they've been able to do as well. But it seems like when people want to talk about expectations for any program on campus, the finger always points back to 2011 and the women's basketball team and what they were able to do, and most fans and pontificators saying with the resources and the money they have at A&M, any team at A&M should be able to do that as well. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, no, Travis, I think you nailed it. For so long, A&M was just a football school. The 2000s came, and A&M made some good hires. They made some upgrades to facilities, And it's not just a football school anymore. Like you said, women's basketball won a national championship. Track, they've won quite a few under Pat Henry. Soccer's made the College Cup. Baseball's made the World Series a couple times. Softball has made the World Series a couple of times. They were on the cusp of making it a couple years ago. Collectively, A&M athletics, the bar has been raised not just in football, but other sports too, like you said. I agree with you.
Well, when I got here and you think about, A&M's always talked about, once again, is they did a lot of talking, but they didn't really walk the walk when it came to facilities and things like that. You got to compare your facilities, and that really, you got to give Bill Byrne a lot of credit for that as well, because it gets back to facilities, coaching, and talent and recruiting. And those are all tied together. And I know moving the SEC helped, but it also SEC, you got to keep up with facilities. You got to have the facilities, and you got to have a coach like a Gary Blair or a Jimbo Fisher, somebody that's won a national championship, because A&M's not a good old boy anymore. This is a business. You want to be the best. And that's what I like about the SEC right now. We're covering Diamond Sports. And you know what? SEC is going to have 2 or 3, 4 baseball teams in Omaha. The softball programs, there's going to be 2 or 3 SEC softball teams up in Oklahoma City. And people want the Aggies to be there once every few years, not once every 10 years or what have you. And that's what I like about, the SEC. When you're in the SEC, big time, it's the best conference. It also creates the best top pressure. You got to win. And I kind of like that, because we all want to be the best. We don't want to say, oh, let's have the 3rd best podcast in Bryan College Station today. No, let's really have the best. I mean, you got to have some ego. If you don't have ego in sports, then get out. Let somebody else, or better yet, someone's going to pass you by.
And Gary Blair certainly knows how to win and how to have that swagger.
Without a doubt. And that's why this year hurts, because they had a team this year to go back, and they didn't get it done. And that's tough for everybody. And, it's what sports is. It's great when you're in 2011 and you go. It's tough in 2021 when you thought you had a chance to go there for 90% of the season, then you couldn't quite get it done. That doesn't belittle what they did the first 90% of the year. They were one of the top 4, if not 2 teams in the country up until the playoffs started. They just didn't get it done, and they'll all have to live with that. But they also did a lot to get to that point. So how do you get back there as quick as you can? That's like I said, the 2011 team was feeling bad when it was March 2010, because they didn't get the job done, but they did something about it the next year.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, guys, thanks so much for joining us to talk a little bit about that 2011 women's basketball national championship team. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and be sure to check AggieSports.com and the Eagle for continuing coverage of all of A&M sports.